It's 4 p.m. on Friday, September 19th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. We begin with one of the most historic votes in British history. The final results are out. Scotland will keep its more than 300-year-long ties with the United Kingdom. For more details, we are going to connect to a journalist in the UK. Joining us on the phone is Mr. Nick Assinder, political editor for the International Business Times. Thank you for joining us, Nick.
Hello, my pleasure.
All right, so let's start with the British Prime Minister David Cameron's speech about today's result. He said it was a well-fought campaign. So what message did he convey, and does it tell us what the results mean for the Prime Minister?
Yes, it's quite extraordinary. All those people who thought that a no vote would mean an end to all the constitutional wrangling in the UK are wrong. The Prime Minister has just announced that not only will he give more power than ever before to the Scottish Parliament, something that was promised towards the end of the campaign to help sway the no vote, he has said that has to be balanced by more power to the other regions and specifically to English regions. And he's raised the prospect of an English Parliament or English MPs only voting on English issues.
And perhaps I should have asked you this question first, but what's the general atmosphere like over there? And, of course, reacting to the Prime Minister's speech?
Well, I think there's an element, it's not exactly shock. I mean, the first reaction, I think, is that certainly in England, there was probably a sigh of relief that the union is going to stay. And certainly for David Cameron, that was vital, because his leadership would have been under threat. He is, after all, leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. And if he had lost the union, he wouldn't have been able to survive that. But it raised all sorts of other questions that he is now having to try and address.
And what do you think drove more than half of the Scottish voters to say no to independence?
I think it was purely the uncertainty of it, the leap in the dark. The leader of the Nationalists, Alex Salmond, was unable to properly answer questions about what currency he would use, whether he could join the EU easily. He at one point actually had to admit that he would keep the Queen as the Queen of Scots, which is something that had not previously been the view of SNP policy. So there were a lot of these uncertainties that left, I think, a lot of people in particularly the waverers, undecided voters, thinking it was just too uncertain and they'd better stick with the union.
And where is it headed to from here on? What kinds of implications will the results have on Scotland?
Well, I think in Scotland, the Scots, in a sense, get the best of both worlds. They get to keep the union, but they get these massive new powers that the Prime Minister has just promised to devolve to them. We've got no detail about that, but it's powers over raising their own taxes, controlling their own spending and their own welfare programme. So a big deal for Scotland. Everyone wins in a sense, apart from, obviously, those nationalists who were desperate to split from the Union. But there are also now big knock-on consequences for England and the other regions, Wales and Northern Ireland, and that it is quite impossible to tell how that will all play out at the moment. The Prime Minister has set a timetable on getting legislation for all this in front of Parliament by January. And that's because he's got a general election coming up in May. I mean, it's an extraordinarily tight timetable. It's going to be a helter-skelter ride for a few months.
All right. Well, we'll certainly have to keep our eyes on the developments of the story. Thank you, Nick, for taking the time to talk to us today. That was Nick Assinder, political editor for the IB Times in the UK. And now on to what will be a 2-week-long celebration for Asian athletes, the 17th Asian Games. The continent's largest sporting event will kick off tonight with a grand opening ceremony in Korea's western port city of Incheon. Our Kwon So-ah has more.
Under the theme, Meet the Bright Future of Asia, the 17th Asian Games are ready to kick off. The city of Incheon is welcoming 15,000 athletes and officials from across the continent to join Asia's largest multi-sport event, which begins this Friday. The opening ceremony starts 6 p.m. at Incheon Asiad Main Stadium with traditional folk performances and shows by famous Korean wave stars such as Psy, Kim Soo-hyun, and EXO. The main celebration is to begin at 19:19 p.m., marking September 19th, the start of the 16-day event, when all 45 participating nations will enter the stadium in the alphabetical order according to the Korean language. North Korea will enter as the 30th country, and South Korea as host country will walk in last. The highlight of the evening will be the lighting of the Asian Games torch. Famous athletes like baseball star Lee Seung-yup, golfer Park In-bi, speed skater Lee Kyu-hyuk, and others will pass the torch along, but the identity of the final torchbearer remains a secret. A total of 439 gold medals are up for grabs in 36 sports at these Asian Games. South Korea has a total of 1,068 athletes competing, its largest number ever, and aims to secure second place in the overall medal count for the 5th consecutive event. But more importantly, the nation hopes for the event serves as a symbol of sport and goodwill for the 4.5 billion Asians across the region. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
And hosting any large international sporting event has its economic pros and cons, but as our Kim Hyun-bin reports, organizers of this year's Asian Games are confident that the city as well as the nation will come out on top in the end.
The eyes of Asia's 4.3 billion people will be on Korea's western port city of Incheon this Friday, as the 17th Asian Games kick off with what promises to be a grand opening ceremony. Korea's third hosting of Asia's premier sporting event is one of the most expensive yet, with the central government and the city of Incheon laying out over $4.7 billion on infrastructure and road construction alone. But the general feeling is that it's going to be worth it.
We expect the Games to have a very positive effect on the local economy and the city. The Korea Institute for International Economic Policy says it'll have an economic benefit of $12.5 billion and create around 270,000 jobs. It'll also help us boost Incheon's brand value.
So, in certain ways, everything is looking great, but ticket sales are worryingly slow. With less than a day before the Games officially open, only 10 of the 36 gaming categories have sold out. Only around 60% of tickets for Friday's opening ceremony have been sold. Ticket sales for the actual sporting events are lower, as sold-out events are generally taking place in smaller venues. Organizers will be hoping they aren't left with tens of thousands of empty seats during events in the large stadiums, such as the athletics. They say that while sales are a little lower than average, low ticket sales are to be expected during the Asian Games, as opposed to an event like the Olympics.
It goes without saying that ticket sales for different sports vary a great deal. When popular Korean athletes are involved in events like swimming, gymnastics, and badminton, tickets sell out super quickly. But it's obviously much more difficult to get many people to come to less recognized sports like sepak takraw and kabaddi.
Organizers say they expect ticket sales to pick up steam once the Games officially open, and are already reporting a pickup in recent days. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
In domestic politics, the embattled main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy was finally able to pick a new interim leader. Representative Moon Hee-sang has no shortage of problems to tackle with his party deeply fractured. Here's our National Assembly correspondent Ji Myung-gil with more.
Moon Hee-sang says he will do everything within his powers to save his faltering party from the grips of turmoil. The five-term lawmaker will be in charge of Korea's main opposition party until it holds a party convention next year to elect a new party chairman. Political analysts say Moon's first order of business will be bringing the different factions from within the party together and then instituting reforms. The veteran lawmaker is also expected to distance himself from the person he's replacing as interim chief, Park Young-sun, who pursued a dramatic reform drive and wanted the party to be more centrist. Moon was tapped for the job because of a management and leadership style he has developed over a 34-year political career. He was able to minimize the damage on the party after its defeat in the 2012 presidential election and served in various governmental posts during the presidencies of Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun. There is speculation that Moon's rise as interim chief sets the stage for an agreement on fixing parliamentary schedules to legislate bills. Meanwhile, the ruling Saenuri Party launched a reform committee on Friday. Over the next 6 months, its 10 members will be tasked with coming up with measures to improve the party's image, regain credibility, and make changes to its process for selecting candidates. Kim Young-kyun, ARIRANG News.
Yesterday, we reported on the government announcing to boost next year's budget spending. The plan focuses a lot on job creation, welfare, and improving the nation's safety infrastructure. Our Kim Ji-yeon breaks down the numbers for us.
Finance Minister Choi Kyung-won is all in. The $19 billion spending increase in the 2015 budget, the highest since 7 years, demonstrates the government's will to turn the economy onto a path of recovery. The plan includes a $670 million boost in spending for social overhead capital projects next year to $23.4 billion, money that will go toward improving the nation's railways and roads in hopes it will spur job creation in the construction sector. It's something the government is placing a premium on in 2015. Next year's budget for areas related to job creation comes to $13.7 billion, an increase of $1 billion from this year. Public safety is another focus in wake of the April ferry disaster that left more than 300 people dead. The safety budget for things like upgrading firefighting equipment and renovating older buildings such as schools has increased nearly 18% to $14 billion. And for the first time ever, more than 30% of next year's budget, around $110 billion, will be directed toward boosting welfare, including the basic pension plan. It was one of President Park Geun-hye's campaign pledges to provide a maximum of $190 to people over the age of 65 who are in the bottom 70% income bracket. The Korean economy grew a mere 0.5% on quarter during the April to June period, the lowest growth in nearly 2 years. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Now, one of the biggest pieces of business news today has to do with China's mega e-commerce website Alibaba. It has finalized its initial public offering at $68 per share, the largest for a U.S.-listed company in history, and also at the top of the expected range of $66 to $68. It will make its debut on the New York Stock Exchange on Friday local time under the ticker symbol BABA. Now, the company has raised nearly $22 billion with that price, and it places the firm's market value at $168 billion, making it rank in the top 40 firms globally, according to S&P Capital IQ. Korea's producer prices dropped for the first time in 4 months in August, due mainly to falling oil prices. The Bank of Korea says the producer price index fell 0.2% last month on year. The decrease comes after the figure continued to decline for 19 straight months until this May before slipping again in August. The bank attributed the drop to prices of industrial products, which declined 0.3% on month, as well as petroleum products, which slipped more than 3% on month as well. Now, from K-pop and Korean movies to Korean food, the cultural reach of the nation is extending. The latest entrant into the race are Korean TV programs, which are finding a new home in the United States. Connie Kim explains.
The influence of the Korean wave has established itself in the Asian market. Now, remakes of Korean dramas and variety shows are set to set sail across the Pacific into the North American market. The love story between a top actress and an alien who landed on Earth hundreds of years ago was a mega hit in Korea. Now, ABC in the US has decided to make its own version. Older celebrities traveling around the world. That's the idea behind the Korean variety program that's now been picked up in the United States. This romantic fantasy, where the main character can travel 20 years back in time for a total of 9 times, will also be remade in the US. The production company behind the two shows, CJ says American buyers are interested in the subject matters of Korean programs.
American dramas go multiple seasons, so U.S. buyers decide to buy the program depending on how well it can be expanded into a series. In the case of 9, the main character travels through time 9 different times. The U.S. producers are working on giving that angle a twist.
Another Korean program, Good Doctor, will get an American twist. The drama, which centers around a genius surgeon with Asperger's syndrome, has been picked up by American broadcaster CBS.
Overcoming disabilities is a topic that appeals to viewers, and the bits of romance in the plot probably grabbed the attention in the US.
Korean programs are the hot new thing in the US, according to Drama Fever, a video streaming website.
Our biggest title end of last year was Heirs. The premiere, so episode 1 of that title, did more views than the season finale of 90210 in the US, which was broadcast around the same time. So it's, you know, they're gaining definitely in terms of momentum and popularity.
The timing for entering the U.S. market seems just about right, given the success that remakes of Latin American drama, telenovelas, and European dramas already enjoy. Korean producers are now hoping these remakes can be another boost to the Korean wave. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Some say Korea appears ready to talk with Japan as long as it's not a bilateral summit. Now, the reason for that may be President Park sitting down with a former Japanese prime minister in Seoul. In the meantime, senior officials from the two sides discuss ways to resolve their differences on Japan's wartime atrocities. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
President Park Geun-hye welcomed a special envoy sent by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Former Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori met with President Park on Friday afternoon, bearing a letter from the Japanese leader. On the same day in Tokyo, senior officials from the two countries are discussing ways to resolve Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. The meetings are the latest in Korea's demonstration of flexibility for talks with Japan. Seoul and Tokyo are fine-tuning plans for a strategic dialogue, the first since President Park took office. Vice foreign ministers from the two countries are expected to meet in Tokyo early next month to discuss a wide range of pending issues. Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida are also looking to meet at the United Nations in New York next week. The string of meetings has fueled speculation about a possible summit between President Park and Prime Minister Abe in November on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Beijing. The two leaders have not held a bilateral meeting since taking office. But President Park remains adamant that Japan must apologize for its wartime treatment of Korean comfort women before she sits down with their Japanese counterpart. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency has released details of the recent European tour made by Pyongyang's Secretary for International Affairs, Kang Seok-ju. In a report Thursday, it said Kang met with 20 or so senior European officials, including members of European Parliament, during his 9-day trip to Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, and Italy. The high-ranking North Korean diplomat is said to have held talks on ways to improve relations with each country. country. Now, North Korea watchers say Kang's trip indicates that the North is making efforts to break out of international isolation. Following the South Korean government's decision to open up its rice market, South Korea will now propose to use its imported rice to aid North Korea. Seoul's Agriculture Ministry says the government plans to lift its limitation on the usage of rice under the so-called Minimum Market Access Agreement. Now, the agreement says the minimum amount of rice the market must import once it opens its market, and that was set at 30% before the market is liberalized. The South Korean government has so far restricted the use of rice to the domestic market only. Later this month, Seoul will submit the modified amendment to the World Trade Organization, which will then decide whether to grant Seoul approval to send the imported rice to North Korea. In other news, South Korea will have a new U.S. ambassador soon after senators approved Mark Lippert as the next top U.S. diplomat to Seoul. Lippert, Chief of Staff to Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, was nominated in early May to replace Sung Kim. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee approved Lippert's nomination in late June, but his nomination had been stuck in the Senate along with dozens of other ambassadors-to-be. His confirmation came despite opposition from Republicans who said Lippert, a close friend of President Barack Obama, was a political nominee. And over in the Middle East, the United States warplanes continued to carry out their supportive role in fighting off Islamic State extremists. And as the pressure heats up, the group has released another video featuring a British hostage. Our Park Ji-won has the details.
A new video released by Islamic State militants on Thursday shows a British journalist who was captured in Syria in 2012. John Kenley, dressed in orange and apparently under duress, takes aim at the British and U.S. governments.
Seeing as I've been abandoned by my government and my fate now lies in the hands of the Islamic State, I have nothing to lose. For the next few programs, I'm going to show you the truth as the Western media tries to drag the public back to the abyss of another war with the Islamic State.
On the battlefield, the U.S. conducted an airstrike targeting IS training camps in Iraq on Thursday. It was the first strike not directly related to supporting Iraqi or Kurdish forces and came on the same day the U.S. Senate authorized support for the Syrian opposition in their fight against IS. Secretary of State John Kerry says the U.S. plan to counter the threat is coming together thanks to allies like France.
President Hollande has announced that he has authorized for France to provide airstrikes in Iraq in response to a request from the government of Iraq, and we obviously welcome that public announcement. That's one of the countries that we've been counting in our list.
The U.S. is ready to strike the militant group in Syria as well. Targets have already been mapped out. Military officials say they are now just waiting for the president's authorization. Regarding a CNN report that there might be a Korean member of the Islamic State, Korea's National Intelligence Service said that was impossible to verify. But the intelligence service did add that if there were any Koreans in the group, they might be North Koreans, considering the close relations between Damascus and Pyongyang. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. It's definitely getting cooler, not just in the mornings and nights now, but also during the days. However, we still have a good amount of sunshine, bringing the highs into the near 30s for some regions. And as you can see, we have some clouds hovering over our nation, but those are clearing out. However, it will be another wet day on Jeju Island where up to 20 millimeters are expected. And meanwhile, nationwide rain is in the forecast next Wednesday due to the indirect influence of Typhoon Fong, which is heading towards Japan. Now, as for the weather conditions in Incheon, where the opening ceremony of the Asian Games will be placed this evening, it's currently 26 degrees there, but by the time of the festivities starts, just over 90 minutes from now, the temperatures will be in the low 20s. Well, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will peak at 28 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will see the highs at 28 and 25 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island is lower at 23, while Dokdo is at 25, while Mankungang is a bit cooler at 24. Well, that's all for now. I'm Shaw Park, and have a wonderful day.
And that brings you to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with more at 6 p.m. Korea time.